Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this important event. I just want to say thank you and also encourage you to try the tasty, famous enchiladas that have just recently arrived. So I'll make this very brief so I can run out there and get one. But it's been such a great 9 months with these two interns. First, I want to thank both of them for their interest in our program and for their contribution while they've been here. It's been really great getting to know the both of you, and your contribution to IARC has been tremendous, so thank you very much. So the two interns we've had this year are Saeko Yamada and Nina Sanders. And Saeko is originally from Japan. She's been in the United States for about 10 years and attended the Institute for American Indian Arts here in Santa Fe, where she received her bachelor's in museum studies and also a second bachelor's in fine arts in studio arts. And Saeko has had the opportunity to work here in Santa Fe at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture at Museum Hill, and also downtown at the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, the Institute for American Indian Arts Museum. So she's had some extensive background in the short time that she's been here, and that expertise that she's brought to the internship has been quite valuable. And I hope that she's also enriched her training through this experience. I'm very interested to hear her talk this afternoon, where she will concentrate on the research that she's been involved in while she's been here in Santa Fe and IARC on the inclusion of the Native American voice in museology, with collections, ethnographic Native American collections, where she has had some involvement. So she will discuss that with us this afternoon. Our second intern is Nina Sanders, and Nina is from the Crow Nation of Montana, and is also an artist. Well, both of them are artists, so that's an add to their resumes. But Nina is a graduate of Arizona State University in American Indian Studies. And Nina has extensive experience working with a number of tribes, including her own, in developing educational programming centered around cultural revitalization. Nina has also interned at the National Museum of the American Indian and other institutions where she spent some time investigating and researching her own tribal history and the material culture of her tribe, as well as other tribes with which she's been engaged, including a few in Arizona. So Nina's this background has also been helpful to IARC, and we're just very, very happy that we've enjoyed the two individuals and their contributions to IARC and SAR. So I want to introduce both of them, and I believe we're going to begin this afternoon with Saeko Yamada.
So thanks for coming today. My name is Saeko Yamada, and Brian already introduced me briefly. So I'm originally from Japan and graduated from the Institute of American Indian Arts with museum studies and studio arts. As a Japanese person, I always felt that Native people and Japanese share similar ideas, and that almost most of everything is related and has life. Studying museum studies at IAIA confirmed it. So I'm going to talk about the significance of Native culture belongings based on the questions I asked to 9 museum professionals who's Native. The quotes are from the responses, but my extended families in Minnesota, friends and classmates from IAIA or the other museum professionals helped me create this presentation. And I don't really feel comfortable researching and presenting about other people's culture, especially after learning about unethical researches being conducted on Native people. I chose this topic so that people who are not familiar with the narratives attached to Native American objects would understand the complexity. I feel that one object is not really a right term. I prefer to use culture materials or belongings which may be in traditional forms for their use or maybe are made to sell. They are usually called Native American arts in English. I want to mention that my Native friends whose first languages are their tribal languages told me that there's no word for art in their languages in the same term as art in English. According to Claude Levi-Strauss, regarded as the father of structural anthropology, quote, culture like language is composed of hidden rules that governs the behavior of practitioners. What made culture unique and different from one another are the hidden rules practitioners understood but unable to articulate. Therefore, the goal of structural anthropology is to identify these rules. It is really challenging to talk about indigenous perspectives in English because itself is putting native perspectives in Western framework or English terminology. But sometimes it is easier for someone who's not from the community to dissect and analyze about customs or beliefs. At the same time, it is difficult to have the true understanding of culture belongings unless someone grew up in a traditional culture. For example, for Native people, drum might have strong association with ceremonies or teachings rather than just a musical instrument because of life experience. So when you are listening to my presentation, I want you to just think about the most meaningful things that you have and the special connections you might have to it. Because I'm gonna give you an assignment. I did my assignment here. So belief history of museums, the collecting practices of Native American objects in Nagpur. The idea of museum is Western origin, and earlier museum has strong association with colonial ideas. For example, savage anthropology is mostly used to describe Euro-American attempts to preserve Native American culture in the 19th and 20th century. It was believed that Native people would physically and culturally disappear because of the forced removals and assimilation policies. Euro-American anthropologists are removing Native American objects, including sacred ceremonial objects and human remains, could help preserve Native culture. Because of the extreme unethical collecting and research practices, the cultural belongings kept in the Native communities have been removed and ended up in museums and private collectors. By the late 1980s, it was estimated more than 2.5 million remains were being possessed by museums, institutions, and private collectors. This is a phone. Okay. So I don't really think I need to talk about the importance of how that materials fall into Nagpur need to be returned to the original communities if they wish and if it is possible. But also other belongings which doesn't fall into Nagpur have a special meaning and relationships to the original communities. And from my understanding, the middle one is the Ojibwe Sundance vessel. They use it during the Sundance, so that's ceremonial. And then next one is the pipe. So it's a ceremonial item, but they are still in museum collections. And then the drum, I'm not sure if it's a ceremonial drum or a drum, but still they are meaningful to the original communities. So native culture belongings are extremely diverse and really complex. According to National Congress of American Indians, there are 562 federally recognized tribes, and there are several hundred groups seeking official federal recognition. Native people have been making their everyday use items with what are locally available in their extremely diverse ecoregions or through trades. For example, shells are commonly used in adornments among many tribes who reside far from the oceans. So there are the pictures just taken around 1900, and they are just wearing shells, just all proud. So that's the complexity. So I created a diagram to show that intangible things, knowledge, teachings, narratives, meaning, values, belief, histories attached to belongings. So the object in the center, and then all these things are in these Native American objects. They provide a basis for traditional understanding interwoven to Native American culture belongings. So this is a quote for a question I asked. Are there any objects in your community that are culturally significant, which can be used to tell your community's culture, value, narratives, or stories? What values, narratives, and stories do they convey? This is really a good quote written in red. Because I came from that culture, use oral histories and narratives, it could be said that everything we create is accompanied with a story that serves to preserve our knowledge systems. Our historic material is part of what keeps our culture intact. It tells us stories and keeps our ancestors close to us. It is imbued with the life of the people who come before us, the people we come from. It is easy to get distracted by the beauty of Native American belongings, but we need to remember the people and communities which the belongings came from. Narratives attached to belongings are extremely meaningful to the people and can be fully understood in their culture framework. So there are more quotes from the same question. Generation spanning philosophies, lessons of ethical behavior, funny, poignant, self-reflecting stories, lifeways, both past and present, are all embedded in and intertwined with culture object. So this person who answered my question, she's Ojibwe from Minnesota, and so I chose this banderia bag from I think it's Minnesota, that area. The original shape was adapted by European soldiers' bag. And it is hard to analyze the design unless you ask the maker. However, there are important symbols for Ojibwe people in this bag. Symbols of sky and underworld on here. And also symbols that represent number 4, as it is important number for Ojibwe people. And it indicates 4 directions in states of vegetation. You see like the seeds, leaf, bud, and fruits on here. 4 parts of life are representing different animal tracks. Well, 4 directions, of course. So you see all these elements in this bag. But that's just really the brief description. If somebody from the culture see this bag, I'm pretty sure you can tell like stories for like hours and hours. So another quote, many object tells related to our cultural values. Pueblo architecture and community planning is also type of object that tells narratives about our cultural value. There are far too many different objects and stories to share all of them, but one story that unites many objects in Pueblo community is narratives surrounding the rain and water. So this is a bowl made by Maria and Julian Martinez, and it has a design of a water serpent on it. In Pueblo culture, it is believed that serpent has control over water and strong association with their cosmology. And this is really a belief description too. If you ask the Pueblo person, I'm pretty sure they can tell you more stories. And so another quote, there are numbers of cultural significant objects that represent cultural values. Some of the most significant objects are something that just cannot be in a collection. I'm thinking about lodge, fire, and tobacco. Those philosophies are something to be taught in an appropriate place and not so much in a museum. So according to the responses I got, things they are not even considered as objects, which could be in museums, have living narratives and importance to Native people. I have some Native friends and extended families, and I have noticed oftentimes they personify their cultural belongings. So another question I had was, in some Native culture, objects are more than objects. They are living things. Is this something that is also part of your culture? How are objects living things? So different quotes are in different colors. I know you can read it, but I'm gonna read it anyways. So the first person answered absolutely. Although we do have objects that are non-living entities, we also have these who are extremely powerful beings. The same way that you or I are living things. Some have a life cycle that needs to be completed. Some are carriers of stories, and some are much more too powerful for either you or I to handle like people. Living spirit is not something only restricted to animal and plant life, but can also be integrated into art and objects. The act of creating objects in the form of a sacred being gives the sacred being in an extension into physical human world. I honestly think that most anything, any object created from the earth or once living animal fit into what viewed as living object. This is a concept that view all objects as having a role and part of our life. Science views inanimate objects such as a rock, chair, kachina dolls, or shrine as non-living. Indigenous and other cultures throughout the world recognize or understand that there is a spirit or life within objects, regardless if they don't show signs of characteristics of the scientific definition of living versus non-living, such as ability to grow and or reproduce. So some of the ceremonial or non-ceremonial belongings could be considered as being or to have life. It could be different depending on the communities. Some tribes are more open to talk about it, and some are not. One common thing about these special belonging is that certain information is attached to it, and information is not everybody to know. There are different degrees of accessing to the information in Native communities. People have to earn the right to access to the information through participating in their community responsibilities and practices. So I asked if is it okay to even mention if the object is ceremonial or sacred, since the belongings that are considered as being often have association with ceremonies and their cultural practices. So again, these quotes, different quotes, it is really depending on the object and community wishes. Some should not be discussed outside of their culture context and or outside of the community, indicating that something is sacred is questionable. It may necessary to indicate the information to the museum staff who may be handling the materials. I think that this is the only way that respect can be garnered from people outside of that community. How is someone to know what is appropriate and inappropriate if you do not share the knowledge with them? Now, I'm not saying that you must disclose everything that is counterproductive, but there are ways of letting others know what they should not know and why. An exhibit label would be an inappropriate place to add information about sensitivity because this may seem to only confirm various stereotypes and stigmas without informing visitors of issues like NAGPRA or create more of a market for similar objects. And in Native culture, knowledge is not for everyone. People have to earn the right to access to that knowledge, male, female, or belonging to certain societies in a community. So the responses are all different. Again, in Native communities, certain knowledge is not for everyone and should never be shared with outside of that community. And unfortunately, most institutions like museums will not always incorporate the needs of Native communities and provide access to the information that should not be shared in the public, even if the tribes inform them that information is inaccurate or insensitive. So this is the last question I had. Is it possible to exhibit such cultural belongings, living objects in museum? Absolutely not for my community. It is depending on the object, varies from communities to communities, although the display of sacred objects is largely inappropriate. Specific living objects require feeding, breathing, participating in a ceremony. Most of museums can't and won't be able to provide the care. A Pueblo person might liken this negligence to a zoo, not care for an animal properly, and thereby allowing the animal to suffer and potentially die. Some should never be displayed but made accessible to community members. It could be possible if they are sleeping, cared for properly, or removing or transferring the spirit and turning it into non-living object. The response very depending on the person and where they are from. This is really the reason museums need help from tribal members to understand Native American belongings in their culture framework so that their wishes are respected. All right, I'm done. So the conclusion, Native communities are really diverse. It is not surprising that you get different answers from people, even in the same tribe or the community. However, everyone who answered my questions expressed the importance of hearing and learning from the Native communities and respecting their wishes. Museums need to establish trust with Native communities, not just extracting information to use. I really think it is time to question about how Euro-American perspective is considered as the norm, and the way to do things is norm. And truly value indigenous perspectives and trying to acknowledge and understand in their culture framework. So here's my question to you. Now, I want you to really think about how you can convey the importance and connection you have with your object by putting it in a pedestal and writing a few sentences about it. Thank you so much.
Balajanina hu biwilgad bi Apsáalooke. Baaxpée bi guchsad litidig ik Baaxpée chwag bawang chlik jessa. Ichigdalum. Oh. My name is Nina Sanders. I'm Crow, or Apsáalooke, as we call ourselves. There's a kind of a debate. They say that Apsáalooke means children of the large-beaked bird. However, some of our elders say that the original term means people of the mountains. And I'll come to that once I start presenting. So my people come from south central Montana. Our reservation, this is our original territory here in the dark gray, and our lands were eventually diminished to what you see there in the white spot. We have several districts. Originally, clan members were put into certain districts, and reservation life essentially changed everything for us. We went from nomadic hunter-gatherers to a society where we had to raise livestock and grow food. Our emergence story involves a duck. The earth was covered with water, and the creator, Egypt, came down, and he told the ducks to go down to the bottom of the water and to bring him some of the substance from the bottom. Eventually, one of the ducks succeeded, and he turned the mud into human beings with his spit and his breath. Because he used his breath, we believe that what we say is sacred in the same way that the Creator gave us that power. So when we speak, we can speak things to life. Our migration story is a very important part of this. We were once part of the Hidatsa band. We have our language is still similar. Anthropologists believe that the break happened between 14 and 1500. However, some linguists believe that the break was much earlier, about 900 AD. We migrated looking for a tobacco plant, and this was from a vision from No Vitals. He took his people on an epic journey, and it was to look for the tobacco plant at the base of a mountain range. We ended up at the Bighorn Mountains. This photograph here, I took it. It's the road that leads up to the medicine wheel, and I'm sure everybody here knows about the medicine wheel. It's a very powerful place. If you ever have an opportunity, go there. My people are known for Crow Fair, our horse culture, elk tooth dresses every year, third weekend in August. If you just get tired of Swaya, come to Crow Fair. This is inside of a teepee. You don't get to see that too often. It's a very private thing, and that's my son and his first cousin. This part is important because I'm talking about something that's it's a sensitive topic to my people, I think to all indigenous people. Medicine Crow is the father of Annie Robert, the woman sitting. She's the mother of Mark Robert, the man sitting in the third photograph, and that is my grandmother, myself, and my mother. I'm a descendant of Medicine Crow, who was one of our last war chiefs. We come from a clan system. It's very important. It's believed that our language and our culture is still intact today because of our clan system. I'm Umbilical. I'm a whistling water. Each of us have characteristics. Old Man Coyote assigned us our clans. Some of us are good hunters. Some of us are good speakers. Take a wild guess at which clan is the good speaker. Baaxpée. Baaxpée means sacred or medicine. It's very important to us. Baaxpée can be our words. Baaxpée can be our belongings. Baaxpée can be a ceremony. Crows believe in one supreme being. That's why we accepted Christians, because we had that in common. We felt like because we had that in common, we could get along with them. We pray directly to Ijikta. Ijikta is first maker. We believe the world we live in has supernatural powers, which is why we have medicine bundles. Rocks have power, animals have power. We believe our words carry a great deal of power, as I told you before. Fasting is essential to making medicine acquiring power or aid. Death is not the end of life, it's simply a changing of houses. When we pass, we go to other side camp. And when we leave, we have to have our bundles with us. We have to be wearing our clothing. Our hair has to be done in the way that an Apsáalooke person's fashion is. Otherwise, we won't be recognized. Other things that are sacred to us are the medicine pipe, the sweat lodge, and the sun dance. Baaxpée. Baaxpée is a ceremony that has to do with planting tobacco. This picture right here with the blue circles is a tobacco bag that's inside of a gallery downtown here in Santa Fe. Spirit of the West, I believe it's called. I could be wrong. I took this photograph, and yeah, it's a little bit disturbing, but we see our objects differently than Pueblos do, which is one of the reasons I chose to do this, because in these conversations, in these presentations that we have, one of the things that you hear over and over is, this is our way, but I don't speak for other cultures. And so Crow is a culture that doesn't really, it's not part of the conversation in a lot of areas, and so ours is very different, and so it's just something to be cognizant about. My first experience in a museum was when I was about 8 years old. It was at the Coulter Museum just south of Yellowstone Park, between Yellowstone and the Tetons. And they carry medicine bundles, they carry Crow objects, moccasins, spore shirts. I went with my great-grandmother. It was during Crow Fair, and we don't participate in any kind of social events when we have a loss in the family, and one of her sons passed away. So we took a trip to Yellowstone Park, and we went to this museum, and the man took my grandmother and my great-grandmother into the collection, and they opened one of her family's bundles. Myself and my mother, we did not go in. But when they came out, there was this incredible wind, and it started to rain. There was thunder, and the collections manager, he chuckled, he was amused by it, and he said, that happens every time we have somebody come and open a bundle. So it was just something that he had accepted. I'm not going to go into salvage anthropology and how, collections ended up in museums, because I think everybody here is pretty much aware of that. But we have one particular collector who collected over 250 medicine bundles on the Crow Reservation between 1917 and 1928. His name was William Wildschut. He was a German. He was selling farm mortgages and just became completely enamored with Crow ways. He made friends with several of our chiefs. We were transitioning into a complete reservation lifestyle. So the last war chiefs were probably in their 60s, 70s, and 80s at that time. This is Chief Pleniku. He has a war bonnet at the Arlington National Cemetery. If you've ever been there, you'll see that massive war bonnet in that case. It's his. And when he went, all of the other chiefs were giving gifts, and he didn't know that that's what you were supposed to do, so he took the war bonnet off of his head and he gave it to them. And so they store it properly now. William Wildschut was an interesting character. I did a lot of research about him at the National Museum of the American Indian. I curated the photographs. They're all online on the Smithsonian Online Virtual Archive. I took parts of the collection and I connected them to some of the archive. This was an incredibly thorough man. Even though he was a farm mortgage manager, he took a lot of notes. He wrote the manuscript for Medicine Bundles, which is a book that's in publication now. You can actually buy it online, find out all about our medicine bundles. He wrote a book about this gentleman, Two Leggins. He was also one of our chiefs. He wrote the manuscript about Pleniku and beadwork. He also collected probably about 80% of what is inside the National Museum of the American Indian. That includes those bundles. The collection is comprehensive. It comes from there's objects in there from about 1850 all the way to about 1928. Wiltshire got very, very close to two leggings. And according to Annie Singer Costa, one of our elders who's actually deceased now, she was the niece of two leggings. And she remembered Wiltshire coming to visit them all the time. And one day they got in the wagon and they had to go to town to get provisions. And when they'd returned, his bundle was gone. And crows they used to put their bundles outside. And they looked all over for it. And eventually two leggings just gave up and thought, well, an animal probably took it. Fast forward to years later, NAGPRA comes along. We have culture committee. They do an inventory. She finds out that this bundle is in the collection. And she says he had to have been the one that took that bundle. He was the only other person other than my family and two leggings that knew where it was. The interesting thing about that, because it can be problematic going into an archive and saying this is a stolen bundle and we need to let everybody know, is in his receipts, he kept a log for absolutely every penny that he spent. George Gustav High would repay him. If he bought a bottle of soda, it was in the ledger. And the only thing that he did not charge for out of thousands of objects and meals and years worth of purchases is that bundle. He donated it to George Gustav High. There are a lot of publications out there where you can read about our sacred ceremonies, our sacred objects, and I'm not going to discourage you from doing that, but be warned that a lot of that information is inaccurate. Some of it is very valuable to our people, so there is no black and white here. These are both Tobacco Society objects, Bashishwa, it's part of the ceremony. These photographs are also from the National Museum of the American Indian. This is a men's court, the whip. Now, when I was at NMAI, I was just a silly kid and I had no idea about museums and what happened behind closed doors. In collections, people would come to me and say, I don't want to touch this, what do we do with this? Where do we put these things? There was some people here that wanted to see this, is this okay? Because these people became my friends. So these were private conversations that were happening. And eventually what I realized is, well, we need to provide some kind of a guideline. I went back to Crow with the support of my tribe, met with the culture committee, and we came up with a set of guidelines. It was almost completed, and as some of you may or may not know, with our tribes, when we have a new election and there's an entirely new administration, so too goes the entire employee list from the last one. So the whole culture committee was changed, everything was changed within a matter of months. So to start all over again. I was fortunate enough to be supported by SAR. My research project was about these bundles, these sacred objects, the proper handling of our objects, and I was funded to go back to Crow and complete the guidelines. The new culture committee was incredibly supportive. They knew how important it was, and they agreed on just about every single guideline. Now, some of the research that I did came from these NAGPRA consultations that happened in the late 90s. Pleniku, the chief you saw on the first photograph, he willed all of his belongings, including his medicine bundles, to the state, or actually it's the Kiwanis, and then the Kiwanis gave it to the state, and then the state gave it to the federal government. The federal government they built a museum, they didn't know how do we handle this, so they brought in about 25 to 30 elders, and they video recorded all of them. A Crow woman interviewed all of them on video, and they took transcripts. All of those transcripts are available at our tribal college. So I reviewed all of those transcripts, pulled the actual guidelines that came from the consultation. It's a 5-page document that they use in handling Pleniku's medicine bundles, and it's essentially the same across the board. These are some of the people that were part of that consultation. Only one is still with us, which is Mardell. She was the person who interviewed the people in the videos. She spoke Crow because it was easier for them to communicate, and obviously, as you've probably heard, there are things in our language that do not translate into English. The first gentleman is Barney Old Coyote. He had a master's degree. He was a World War II veteran. He has an incredible story. If we had more time, I could tell you, of taking a medicine bundle into battle. Joe Medicine Crow. Most people know Joe Medicine Crow. He was a historian and anthropologist. He passed away last year in May. And the gentleman down on the bottom is Grant Boltel. All of these men were part of different societies, some of them tobacco societies, some of them not, some of them Sundance, and there's bundles for each of those ceremonies. Out of this document, these are things that I thought were interesting takeaways that you could take with you. It's important to consult the right people. You can't have a Sundance person say this is what you do with a tobacco sacred object. A Crow thing is it belongs to whoever is in possession of it. So right now, technically, all those Crow medicine bundles belong to Kevin Gover. It's funny, but it's true. Traditionally, bundles were interred with the person when they passed, unless they gave them away. And if they weren't given away, they were taken back to the point of inspiration. And family members knew where they fasted, where the vision was, so if it was in the Bighorn Mountains, they would take it back to the Bighorn Mountains. And that was the end of its life. That object has a spirit, as Saeko was saying, and it has an end. And that spirit of that object would go back to other side camp with its people. In cases where we have no idea what an item is for, how it came to be, we give it to the river, because we believe that the river takes things that are not good and brings back the things that are. An interesting story with this is, it was told to me by Tim McCleary when they were doing some NAGPRA consultations. And they went to NMAI, or not NAGPRA, but they were doing consultations at NMAI, and there's a witchcraft bundle there, and I use the term witchcraft very loosely, but it was a bundle that was for revenge, and it's to kill people. It's very old, and they were advised to throw it in the Potomac River. They said, we wouldn't even try to take this home, it's dangerous, and it's dangerous for the people who are here, who are working here. You think it got thrown in the Potomac River? No, it's still there. In Crow Way, bundles should be hung on the west side of your home. We can't hang them outside anymore, but that's just kind of common practice. They should always be hung up high. You don't put them near the floor. You take very good care of them. They're like children or something that you love very, very much. And so when we advise collections people, it's okay to clean it, it's okay to move it, don't open it up. But treat it with respect. Handle it like it means something, like it's important, like it's a person. One of the most interesting things is that almost all of those elders that you saw in those photographs, the rest of them believe that it's okay to have an exhibition for Tobacco Society. And that's interesting because it's very contradictory to Pueblo belief, and just I have the utmost respect for Pueblo ways. I think if I could take some of them back to my people, I could. I wished I could. But they believe that an exhibition of the society would be something that would greatly benefit the public and our own people, because a lot of times our own people, most of them living off the reservation, could learn something in that context. Because you have a kid whose parents maybe were in boarding school and never went back home, but they really want to know who they are. Maybe they know their clan, and they Google something, they check out one of those books that you saw, and they're misinformed. So if a museum curator, if a museum agreed to do an exhibition like this, and there was a true consultation that happened and Native people were actually curating, incredible amounts of information and healing could happen from that. I actually talked to museum curator yesterday and brought it up, and she just was like, no, I don't think that that's going to happen. And I said, well, even with the support of my own people, our elders, people from Tobacco Society, and she said, no. Hopefully that changes, and maybe you can go out there and encourage some people to make something like that happen. And I'm pretty sure we're not the only tribe that feels that way. The guidelines that I did, I drew from the NAGPRA guidelines that were done with the Pleniku Museum, and this was the elder group. There was probably about 200 elders in there because we have 10,000 members, and they were just incredibly open. They loved talking about it. There were some who have not been part of societies or ceremonies for a very long time, generations even, because not every Crow has a medicine bundle. They liked talking about it. I think it was liberating because in a lot of our families, we are afraid to talk about those things. And I feel like we start to lose part of our identity when we're not empowered to have those conversations. For me personally, I grew up with medicine bundles in our home. And so I was taught not to be afraid of them, but to be respectful. And there's a huge difference. I didn't know everything about them, but I knew that I didn't understand. So there's a difference between knowing and understanding. And in our way, understanding is the most important thing. So even if you pick up one of those books, you read about any culture and their ceremonies, their sacred objects, just because you know doesn't mean you understand. This is the Crow Isle at NMAI, at the CRC. At the very top are sacred objects. Not all of them are bundles. Some of them are pieces of jewelry, or things that we put on our horses. Like that whip that I showed you with the fox attached to it, that's considered a sacred object. It's not highly sensitive, but the man who fasted for that and had a vision and was given that power to make his horse run faster considered that a sacred object. Some of the things that I've learned in this process, which has only been about a year and a half, is there's a lack of space in museums. They do want to repatriate a lot of things, but unfortunately, in a lot of situations, we can't. In our case, it's almost impossible for us to go and repatriate a sacred object. We just don't do it. In the past, maybe 20 years, there was probably, they said, this is from Terry Snowball, he said, we've had one repatriation. And he said that could have been human remains. That's just because it's something that we don't do. In our way, Kevin Gover would have to give it back to us. We wouldn't fill out any forms. We wouldn't go and ask him for it. He would have to get a U-Haul truck, load up all of our bundles, and bring them back to Crow and participate in a ceremony with us in order for it to be appropriate. Because if we went to just take them, they could hurt us. We believe that they have a spirit. We believe they're like people, and they know where they're supposed to be and when they're supposed to be there. So if it's meant to be, they'll come back to us. You never know, Kevin might rent that truck and bring it back. A lot of our items have been violated. There used to be Boy Scouts back in, I think, like the 50s and 60s that would go into museum collections, and they would open up the bundles and show them what was inside. And, oh, yeah, look at this dead bird, and, just really crazy things, and that bundle is violated. It's no good to us anymore. We mourn for it. So even if it was brought back, we would have to give it back to the river because we don't know what to do with it anymore. We have drastically different knowledge systems. For me to tell Kevin Gover, you're going to have to just bring it. You have to bring it back home. I'm not going to fill out any forms. It's not that he doesn't believe our way, but that knowledge system that I'm an employee, these are the rules, this is protocol. We can't break that protocol because we're part of an institution, and then you're talking about human beings. You're talking about belief systems, ways of knowing. And so on one side, you have people who are working, and this is their job, and they went to school their entire life, and then you're talking about, on this side, our ancestors, these living things. How do you find that place in the middle where you can understand one another and actually do some real work? the ramifications of preserving objects away from their place of origin. We didn't preserve things. They were supposed to go with their maker. There's an end to their life. So to be preserved forever, they talk about technology, well, they might be able to preserve you and freeze your body and you could live forever when they finally figure out how to stop the aging process. Would you really want that for yourself? Well, these things are like us. How do we know that that's what they want for themselves, right? This is an umbilical cord amulet. I believe it's in it's in Minneapolis, and it's Crow. So we believe with our umbilical cord amulets, there's a baby's, the dried up umbilical cord is in there, right? And we keep them next to us. We put them on our dance gear when we're doing any kind of a dance. And when your mother passes, that amulet is given to you, and then you take it with you when you go to other side camp. And you don't let it leave home. That's what keeps you close. They say that you'll be lost. You won't know where you are. You won't know what you're doing. You need to remember where you came from. Just think the spirit of this person is probably hanging out at this Minneapolis institution. That's a little girl's dress. I put my hand next to it to kind of help make the connection that these things are alive. They need to be touched. And in a lot of museums, we're fortunate as Indigenous people to be able to handle our own objects. And that used to be something that was unheard of. Indigenous people were not even allowed into collections. So there have been good things that have been happening, and some of the people that are helping to initiate that are in this very room. Unlike Saeko, because she's so incredibly respectful, and I feel like I am too, but I think that it's my job. It doesn't matter if I have a bachelor's degree or if I didn't even pass 9th grade, to be able to say this is what my people need. Museum people need to ask for guidelines, seek them out, find money for people to come in, for culture keepers to come in and say, this is what you need to do with these things. You know, this isn't just a job. You're dealing with ancestors, human beings, the spirits of these things that come from this land. Establish close, meaningful relationships. I guess that's indigenizing museums, right? It's not the same as called decolonizing, because you're not trying to get rid of anything. You're just taking what you were taught, generosity, reciprocity, kindness, listening, trust, respect, things like that. When you go into those kinds of relationships with Native people and you befriend them, it's a lot easier to think of things in their terms. You may not completely understand, but at least you tried. I think that's important. And as Native people, one of the things that I tell my own people is they have things to teach you too. You don't have to be angry. Maybe they want to be forgiven for the things that happened in the past. Curatorial ethics, holding others accountable. There are some incredibly brilliant people out there who are my superiors, and I try to find the right way to address certain things that I may not believe are appropriate. Like, did you talk to anyone from this community? Did you just consult with them and say, oh yeah, that's great, and take a couple of words and put it into your text? Or did you actually sit down and try to understand why they feel that way? Where you should put something, and why? I don't think we hold curators accountable a lot of times, and sometimes we don't even hold a lot of museum directors accountable. And I think that needs to stop. I think we need to just essentially say, hey, that's not right, and be fearless about that. And we can do it in a good way, with good hearts, with respect, and people who do not hold themselves accountable or think that they don't have to listen to Native communities or other non-Native people who are advocating. I think that those people need to be, held accountable in different ways. We need to have conversations about that. I think that it's shameful behavior to believe that you're above everything. bringing culture keepers into the curatorial process, which I discussed earlier. The end. Thank you.